London. How are we doing today? Wow, it's a big crowd. My name is Ning, and I'm a content designer from Singapore. Now, as you can tell from my title, I have a few confessions to make today. But before that, recently, over New Year's Day, I became a new dad. Thank you. So my baby is only about 4 or 5 months old. I think she's somewhere in the crowd today. I think she might be the only baby at Config today. So as you can tell, we're both having fun, touching grass, as they say. And something I learned about babies as a dad is that they've got these reflexes. How many of you are dads or mums in the crowd? Many of you are fantastic. So they've got these reflexes, and this is one very cute reflex called the Moro reflex or the startle reflex, where they suddenly go like this, right? And they're kind of asking for a hug. At least to me. So some of these reflexes, they go away as they age. But many of these reflexes, they actually stick with us through adulthood. Not this particular one, but we use some of those as we apply our user experience and our designs. And I'll explain why. So what does this mean to you, this price tag? It's $29.90. This is something called charm pricing. It's been used ever since men changed from bartering to bills. And it's because we find this slightly cheaper than it ought to be because we tend to round down to 20 as opposed to rounding it up to 30 because we focus on the anchor number, which is more significant. So that's an example of something that we instinctively feel. Now, what about this, $14.90? This is great. This is half price, right? This is fantastic because we know that this is a good discount. Well, it's very logical. I will go for that. But what if we add more things to it? We say, all right, this is something that you cannot miss, right? Buy now, buy, and please don't miss out because other people are buying too. Now, instinctively, I feel this backfires a little bit. I'm less inclined to buy it than if it would just were the half-price discount. And the reason for that, I think, is it looks like a pop-up, an ad, and it's telling me that I'm being silly if I don't buy this. And a real-life example, some time ago, I was buying a pair of trousers at Uniqlo, and I came across this, and it really made me think. Why was I so drawn to this? This is a real discount. I was like, wow, $14.90, this is a huge discount. But not only because there was a previous price, but it was pasted over a few times. And I thought to myself, wow, this is a genuine one. Why? Because I didn't think that the sales staff intentionally pasted over these stickers just to induce me to buy it, right? I thought this was a real discount. And there's some implicit trust in this sort of thing that we do. Now, there's a law, Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations. This is put out in 2008, which states that a commercial practice is a misleading action if it is likely to deceive the average consumer or force them to make a transaction that they would not have taken otherwise. And this is something we see in real life, but in the digital space, I don't know if this is really being enforced. And I'm going to draw an obscure reference from my favorite game of all time, Disco Elysium. How many of you know this game? Oh, lovely. Thank you, my people. So Disco Elysium is it's a point-and-click adventure story about a washed-up cop trying to solve the perfect crime. And a lot of the gameplay it focuses on the narrative, on the words, so much so that it won the Game of the Year a few years ago. And in this game, there's a strange object. It's called it's a necktie, but it's not just any necktie. It's called the horrific necktie. And it's horrific because it's a voice in your head. It keeps talking to you, and it has this really wild, anarchic imagination, and it's very chaotic. It has a very fascinating personality and voice. And this is an example of a dialogue in the game where you walk into a shop, you're trying to buy a drink or a spirit, and a necktie keeps trying to convince you to buy this drink, and let's have a listen.
Snap out of it, Bratan! This is no time for melancholy introspection. It's time to buy that spirit. See? There it is, Bratushka. The spirit. Let's buy the spirit. 300 real is a lot, but this has to be done.
This has to be done. You need to buy the spirit. You need to buy this. And this is something I think all of us have a little bit, right? A noose around our necks telling us we should do this, we shouldn't do that. And over time, I just got a bit skeptical. I thought, okay, there's a third option. What if I don't want to listen to this necktie anymore? And in a sense, we've all become sneaky little hobbits. Gollum, to draw the analogy even further, Gollum has like two voices in his head, like sneaky little hobbits. But then at the same time, oh no, hobbits are my friend, right? So like, it's a bit strange when you've got these two things trying to compete, and it really throws your risk and reward out of balance. And I'm tempted to say all of you are sneaky little designers. And honestly, content designers and writers like myself are really the most to blame. And I'm starting to realize that other people are being self-aware as well. Last year, at last year's config, there was a lot of talk about a staleness in the UX. For example, Ken Warboys talks about a sea of sameness. Things are starting to look the same. And it's the same in micro copy, in writing as well. There's a sense of a monoculture in the way that we write. And we've sort of arrived at like a post-nudge era. So the behavioral nudging that we're still used to, front-loading, social proof, and so on, people can spot them. People know, right? They're not stupid. And these deceptive or dark patterns, over time, you can get short-term engagement, but in the long term, it really erodes trust. So we can't expect our users to not pick it up, while keep using the same tactics over and over again. It's a fool me once, shame on you, but fool me twice, shame on me situation. And in a sense, we, the magicians, we have revealed our trick. And that's why we have arrived, I think, at an age of UX skepticism, and how I've become a raging skeptic. Some examples of why this takes place. For example, user reviews. Now, when I go onto a website nowadays, and if I see a user review, my first instinct is that, is this made up or is this real? Right, I don't know if you feel that way, but that's just me. Or when I look at film reviews now on Rotten Tomatoes, I make sure to check the popular review, because things like this can happen. And even Miyazaki, right, filmmaker, he said, yeah, I'm going to make my last film. It's going to be my final film. And there's another one coming. And spoiler alert, there is another one after his most recent film. Loading bars, for example, they become less trustworthy. I don't think I've ever met, in recent years anyway, a loading bar that's actually proportionate to its loading time. Now, I used to work for Bolt, ride-hailing app, fantastic app. And we have this, same for Uber, there's arrival time. And this arrival time, I know sometimes not up to design, but I can't help to think the number of times where I've stood there and it says arriving in 3 minutes. And I've clearly stood there for 5 minutes, and it still says arriving in 3 minutes. And I'm not sure why these things happen, but a lot of it, of course, is not due to design, but we want to adapt to our users' needs and not to create distrust. And so we get away with it sometimes because I think there's hedonic adaptation going on. What is this? This is a psychological phenomenon where we tend to forget bad things that happen and we write them off as a one-off situation. Why? Because there's a tendency for us to regress to the norm, to regress to an equilibrium in our emotions, so we don't feel that these experiences will last or they don't affect us in the long term. Now, to stretch it a bit further, we've got these three examples here. This is spicy food, and horror films, and skydiving. And what do they have in common? So spicy food is food that, perhaps, I'm from Singapore, so I can really take a lot of spicy food, but if you're eating it for the first time, it can hurt a little bit. And for horror films, it's fear, right? It's fear that comes out when you watch it. And skydiving, it goes against all human instinct to jump out of a plane. But they have some similarities because they are hedonic adaptation pushed to the extreme. And what's initially a negative experience can, over time, be an acquired taste and turn out to be pleasurable. So hedonic adaptation becomes hedonic reversal. And that's because our brain tells us that this pain or this negative thing is not really a threat. It's not really a threat. And we grow to like it sometimes. How then is this linked to UX? Well, we know Duolingo. Duolingo, when it started, I think there's a lot of guilt-based notifications, and they keep pushing our buttons to the point where we think, what's Duolingo doing? But I think over time, it's gotten less and less evil, so to speak. Why? Because I think they're self-aware. They know that we know what they're doing, and we know that they know that we know. So it's fair game. It's kind of like having a personal trainer, right? Like yelling at you, you sort of want that so that you have some discipline to learn your language. Now, coming back to the topic of skepticism, there's a lot of that right now in the UX space and in the interfaces that we use. How can we recover from it, if we can recover from it? And I think, yes, we can. And how do we do that? Well, by humanizing what we design, but also by building, writing, designing for specific emotions. And why specific emotions? Well, when you don't really know how to describe a problem or an emotion, it's really hard to address it. And in Peter Morville's seminal work on information architecture, he talks about this. He refers to it as the pain with no name. The pain with no name, because you can't really name it. And Shakespeare might say it's the grief that does not speak. And when you can't speak its name, it's much more powerful and much more sinister and evil. Now, which is why I tend to think the inability to articulate a problem limits our ability to fix it. The inability to articulate a problem limits our ability to fix it. And when you get vague problems, you end up with vague solutions. And how can we address that? What's the solution? So this is something called emotional granularity. This is an emotions wheel. It allows someone to just do that. So you've got a primary set of emotions, and it expands out, and it expands out even more nuanced emotions. And research suggests that people who are able to label precisely, pinpoint an emotion, they become more emotionally intelligent, and they're more resilient when they face life's difficulties. And how does it apply to UX? So instead of saying in your research, yeah, this is a poor user experience, the user is frustrated, think about words like impatient, or like they're losing focus, and so on and so forth. In a way, it's sort of reversing George Orwell's 1984. Right? If you're familiar with the book, this is a great cover, by the way. The book talks a lot about censorship, and this is a 2013 remake of the cover, which censors out the title, which I think is really clever. But what it does is, in the book, the state, it's a very controlling authoritarian state, it creates a new language called newspeak that supersedes the old language called old speak. And in old speak is what we know, these are words for joy or for happiness, being happy. And newspeak limits all of these, right? You can't say any of these. It's what's known as a thought crime. You need to say it's just good, plus good, or double plus good. That's it, right? And the state does this, well, in the book, it's able to constrain and restrain people's emotions by using language and vocabulary. And that's something that, hopefully is not happening in the world today. Another example, for emoji, I used to use a smiley face or a face with a tear. And nowadays, more emojis is coming up, and there's this emoji. It's a smiling face with a tear. And I love it. I use it all the time. It's very nuanced. I have no idea what it's trying to say. A bit like Hide the Pain Harold, but I use it all the time. My friends are like, what are you trying to say? But you sort of get it, right? It's very nuanced, right? It's very specific. It's very versatile. And so we need to understand that at the end of the day, the users feel something with every interaction. Users feel something with every interaction. To go into detail, for example, how do we make sure our users feel focused? Well, there's the flow theory. You can look at that. It talks about how we can get our users to feel immersed in a task, right? And so they fulfill the task on towards completion. Or how do we get them to match the challenge level with their skill level? And when it's a good match, they really feel in the zone, right? And in a flow state. And you can think of maybe for your app, you can design something for the pro user and something for the easy user, for the newbie, so to speak. Or you can look at feeling safe. It doesn't apply just to the digital world. This is in the medical world. There's a standard called the IEC 62366. And this is a process for design to look at the usability of a medical device as it relates to safety. The usability of a medical device as it relates to safety. And it really helps users and operators of the machinery to feel safe when they operate them. Or you can talk about how can we get our users to feel supported. So this draws from educational psychology, and this is where writing really plays a huge part, and I'm a big fan of this. Writing can be seen as scaffolding, right? Writing is seen as scaffolding to help build up something for the user. And this is a state when the user feels like they can do it, but they just need a bit of help from a peer or a teacher or a guide to push them along. So these are all granular emotions that you can talk about. We've talked about a lot of these, but let me just offer something else, another concept as dessert. And this is affect. And affect is a fundamental experience of how we design experiences and our content. So think of it like background music as we interact with our features and our products. It is there to set the context and to give you really a vibe, right? Just like how the balloons out the back, they're great. What purpose do they serve? Not much, but they give a really good vibe, and it's the vibe that really, really counts, right, to an event or to some of the products that we make. And so there are a few things related to affect. So this is affect heuristic. This is the system one sort of thinking. It's kind of like the gut feel, right, the instinct that helps us to take a mental shortcut when we're deciding something. And UXers know this very well. This is when we say an experience is intuitive to a user, intuition is the affect heuristic. There's also affect design. Right? This is more product design, and this is a standardized cigarette pack designed for in a lot of countries. And what it does is it evokes a negative response, negative emotion in the user, so that they are dissuaded from picking up the pack. And another example, this is HAL 9000, affective computing. Affective computing talks about how we design for emotional intelligence in AI and in chatbots. And it really helps, especially when we're designing for more empathy-driven services or more things that account for neurodiversity. And yeah, in HAL 9000, which is Stanley Kubrick's film on A Space Odyssey, HAL 9000 is an AI that has a very calm and controlled tone, but it belies a very sinister and malicious intent. And conversational designers, will notice very well, how do we design a voice to sound authoritative or warm or friendly and so on. So I've talked a lot today about different things, from neckties to nudges, from golem to granularity, and all these big words, Ultimately, at the end of the day, what we want to do is we want to acknowledge that there is a lot of skepticism out there. People are distrusting of the internet, and there's a way to recover by humanizing and by writing for specific emotions. This is one of my favorite memes. Reject humanity, return to Monka, stylized Monka. And it's trying to be ironic about embracing a simpler time, back to nature, back to our more primitive lifestyle. But really, I don't think we should be monkey seeing, monkey doing in our designs. Just because somebody else is using this or saying this, writing this, doesn't mean that we should do it as well. Because language creation, as Noam Chomsky says, is something that's infinitely varied. So we should reject Monka and return to humanity. So stop using the dirty tricks, and let's return to humanity. Thank you very much for listening.